You use the phrase bearing witness, and MSF has made the point repeatedly that it feels that is part of its calling, and that the principle of neutrality and impartiality are not the same thing as silence. But when you find yourselves in the difficult situation where to deliver aid to a vulnerable population, to a suffering population, requires negotiations and the agreement of often hostile or corrupt governments, what do you do? How do you decide whether if a government says to you, in effect, or a militia or a group of people who are in control of a given territory, if they effectively say to you, the price of providing care to those people is that you must bite your tongue, or the price is that you must be seen to be talking to us, how do you decide whether that is a price that is too high, given that part of the price will be paid by people who either will or will not receive emergency medical care?
Well, this question actually forms the basis of the very idea of Doctors Without Borders, or Médecins Sans Frontières. In our founding mythology, which has a bit of myth to it, although it's largely true, there were doctors working in Nigeria for the French Red Cross who were biting their tongues, and they were not allowed to say what was going on, the abuse and manipulation on both sides of the population. And when they came back from that assignment, they formed MSF with the idea that not only would our principal role be to deliver medical humanitarian assistance, but also have this component of speaking out, or in French, they use the term témoignage, and it means to bear witness. And when you go back into our history of doing so, and you can go back to it through a special project of archiving that we have published called the Speaking Out Case Studies. So it's a review of critical dilemmas or constraints or controversies that we have had internally around speaking out. And if you go to the website msf.org, which is our main international website, but then /speaking out, so msf.org/speaking out, you'll see that what we've done, and it takes a lot of time, it's not easy to pull together, but we publish cases. So we have over a dozen studies now, ranging from famine and forced relocations in Ethiopia from 1984 to 1986, to war crimes and politics of terror in Chechnya from 1994 to 2004, or MSF in the Rohingya from 1991 to 2014. And the methodology is that our archivists pour through the press clippings, the documents, they interview the main protagonists if they're still around and available. They look at emails, internal reports. You know, they go into the old archival bins of papers that nobody's looked at for a decade, and they try to untangle how the positions came to be, the public positions, and how that squares with people's personal recollections, because sometimes there is a difference. So I can even tell you of times when I was involved, and my version of it might be very different than yours if you were also involved, but from a different part of the world. One example right now that we're experiencing is in Ukraine, where we have most of our activities in Ukraine-controlled areas. But in areas that the Russian forces are controlling, we know there's great suffering. And in areas of Russian territory, there are a lot of reports of people from Ukraine having been taken there against their will. And we don't know about their status. We don't know how they're doing. Do they have medical needs? What have they experienced or suffered? If we had a look at that, and we were not able to ever say anything about what we were seeing, if we were not able to assist them and then actually report out what we were seeing, it would be a horrible situation for our teams to be in. But without a doubt, this is the kind of thing that all aid workers encounter. In Libya, for example, we had teams in the early days of the immigration cells when the International Organization for Migration and the European Union was funding very cruel system of denying people access to a due process of either asylum claims or migration, and just locking them up in cells. And there were reports of torture, of even enslavement. We had teams working in those cells, and they were very much concerned about the safety of people. But at a certain point, you snap, you say, hey, wait a minute, I've just stitched up this person who was beaten in the cell, tortured, and now they're going to be taken back into the torture room, and they will be brought back to me in the clinical setting for me to stitch up again. We have to speak out. And so with that, we publish reports, and there is always a risk that we will no longer be able to access those areas, and those have to fit into our calculation. But at a certain point, I think many of us go back to the words that were spoken when we did receive the Nobel Prize, which is sort of a strange prize to talk about because so many so many individuals and organizations have received it that we would not consider people or organizations that have really upheld peace. And we're not a peace organization, we're a humanitarian organization. We don't do peace building or reconstruction per se, but in the acceptance speech, Dr. James Orbinski, who was our international president at the time, he spoke about this idea of the importance of speaking out and why we do it. He used that acceptance speech as a way to make a point at the time about Russian violence against civilians in Chechnya. And he said, quote, "Silence has long been confused with neutrality and has been presented as a necessary condition for humanitarian action. From its beginning, MSF was created in opposition to this assumption. We are not sure that words can always save lives, but we know that silence can certainly kill." So that's the quote from the speech. And so for many of us, this kind of thinking is what drew us to MSF in the first place, because we could have gone to work anywhere else. But this importance of bearing witness is actually a pillar of our engagement with the organization. It's not to say that we can always do it. You know, sometimes we delay, sometimes the debates cause us to seem to dither, and our colleagues from those places that are saying, why aren't we saying anything? Why aren't we saying anything? Become disillusioned. And that has happened even in my time with the organization. But at least we know that there's a process. We will debate it on the ground. We will debate it at headquarters. We will make sure that at the highest level, we're making the decision in a timely way as much as possible, knowing that at the end of the day, there might be a compromise, that not everyone will be satisfied, but that at least there has been serious attention to the options.